All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're not talking about some big sweeping theory. Instead, we're doing a deep dive into a single case file, a really meticulously documented one from an actual scientific paper. We're going to break down what might be one of the most baffling cases of a child's memory ever recorded. So, just imagine for a second. You hear those words being screamed night after night from your 2-year-old son's bedroom. No, that's not a line from a horror movie. For the Leininger family, that was their reality. And believe me, it was only the beginning. So this is James Leininger. To his parents, Bruce and Andrea, he was just their happy, typical toddler. But then came the nightmares. Terrifying, vivid nightmares. And the things he said, the way he played, it all started to paint this impossible picture of a life he couldn't have lived. The life of a World War II pilot. So let's really unpack these impossible memories. How did this all start? Well, funny enough, it didn't begin with the nightmares. It all started with a pretty normal family trip, a visit to a flight museum that seems to have triggered something truly extraordinary. And the escalation here was, wow, it was fast. Just look at this timeline. In February, he's just a little kid fascinated by old planes at a museum. Totally normal. But by April, just 2 months later, he starts saying airplane crash on fire and just compulsively smashing his toy planes into the furniture. Then, by summer, it evolves into these full-blown, thrashing, screaming night terrors. You know, his behavior got so intense that researchers later said it looked a lot like something called post-traumatic play. That's a clinical term for what happens when children who have gone through something awful or real trauma compulsively reenact it over and over. But that was the big, perplexing question for his parents, right? What possible trauma could their little boy have ever experienced? So as these nightmares just kept getting worse, James's dad, Bruce, he started to think, maybe this isn't just a phase. Maybe this isn't just a bad dream. He began to treat his son's strange, cryptic statements less like a child's fantasy and more like clues in a very, very real investigation. The first step in any investigation, right? You got to get the details. So during a quiet moment when James was calm, his parents just asked him a simple question about the plane from his nightmares. And James, who was barely 2.5 years old at this point, gave this incredibly specific answer: a Corsair. Now, the Corsair was a famous World War II fighter plane. It had these distinctive bent wings. That is a very, very specific detail for a toddler to know. Okay. So one detail, right? A specific name like Corsair. Maybe he heard it somewhere. A coincidence. It's possible. But the family kept digging. The next logical question was, where did this plane of yours fly from? And his answer was just stunning. He said he flew from a boat. And when they pressed him for the name of the boat, he said, Natoma. Natoma. I mean, think about that. That's not a common name. It's certainly not something you'd hear on Sesame Street. And this was the moment everything changed. Bruce Leininger gets on the computer, searches for Natoma, and there it is, the USS Natoma Bay, a real World War II escort carrier that served in the Pacific Theater. And this is key. He printed out the records, and the date on that printout, August 27, 2000, became a critical piece of documented evidence. So now they have the type of plane, and they have the ship it flew from. Unbelievable. But was there anyone else in these memories? They decided to ask him if he remembered any other names, anyone he flew with. His response was immediate, no hesitation. Jack Larsen, another incredibly specific, verifiable name. The pieces of this impossible puzzle were starting to form a picture, but they still had no idea who the little man in the burning plane actually was. And this brings us to the absolute climax of this whole investigation. All of these strange, separate clues, the Corsair, the Natoma, Jack Larsen, they're all about to converge on one single person from history. Bruce's search eventually leads him to a reunion for the veterans of the USS Natoma Bay, and it's there that he learns this one single critical fact. During the entire bloody Iwo Jima campaign, only one pilot from that ship was killed in action. Just one. His name was James M. Huston, Jr. Okay, just look at this. This table lays out the absolutely stunning alignment. And remember, the most important part, James Leininger made all these statements before anyone in his family had ever heard the name James Huston. He said he was a pilot who flew off the Natoma. Correct. He said he died near Iwo Jima. Correct. He said his plane was shot in the engine. Eyewitnesses from the time confirmed a direct engine hit. And Jack Larsen? Jack Larsen was real, and he was the pilot flying right next to James Huston on that final mission. Every major detail, it all lined up. The correlations are just undeniable. It's incredible. But that leaves us with the real question, the one that matters. How? How is any of this possible? The research paper that documents this case doesn't just tell this amazing story. It then systematically tries to find any rational explanation it can. So the researchers basically went down a checklist exploring every single possibility, starting with the most ordinary and logical ones. Could this all be a hoax? A fraud? Was it just over-the-top childhood fantasy? Did he learn this stuff somewhere and forget? Only after trying to rule all of those out did they even begin to consider the more unconventional explanations. All right, so let's tackle the two biggest skeptical arguments right off the bat. First, fraud. The paper basically says this is implausible. The parents had no motivation to start this multi-year hoax, and they even turned down a chance to publicize the story with ABC News before they had identified Huston. Okay, so what about fantasy? Well, the sheer specificity of names like Natoma and the severity of those trauma-like symptoms, it just doesn't fit with typical childhood make-believe. Well, what about other explanations? Could James have just picked this up normally? Maybe he overheard a documentary his parents were watching or saw something in a book. The paper argues no, there were literally no known books or TV shows about this specific pilot, James Huston, for him to have absorbed this from. So then they consider something more paranormal, like a psychic psi transfer. But the researchers say that's pretty speculative. I mean, why would he psychically connect with this one specific pilot out of the millions of people who died in war? So, if all the conventional explanations seem to fall short, we're left with a really profound question. According to the researchers who studied this for years, what's the ultimate significance of the James Leininger case? And this right here is the whole ballgame. It's why this case stands out from just being a spooky story. It's the documentation. James's most incredible and specific statements, Natoma, Jack Larsen, they were all documented on video and in writing before the family even knew a pilot named James Huston existed. That is so important because it prevents what's called retroactive falsification, where people might accidentally misremember what was said to make it fit the facts they learn later. The author of the study, Dr. Jim B. Tucker from the University of Virginia School of Medicine, is very careful. He doesn't claim this is 100% definitive proof of anything, but his final conclusion, as you can see right here, is that the facts of the case are so strong that the explanation of reincarnation warrants serious consideration. That's a powerful statement from a medical doctor at a major university. And so that leaves us with this final, really challenging thought. Look, this is just one case study, right? But if it is what it appears to be, if it's possible for specific, factual, verifiable memories to survive the physical death of the brain, what does that imply about the very nature of consciousness itself? What does that say about who, or maybe what, we really are?